Welcome back, everyone. It is the time of year in certain parts of the world that you definitely want to remote start or go out and start your car up so it can thaw out and get the juices flowing in there, so when you get into your vehicle that it's on a sheet of ice or a block of ice or frozen solid. There's a lot of conversation going back and forth about vehicles idling for a long period of time or running for a long period of time, right? So start your car up. Most remote start systems, I think, were 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then it shuts the car down. It's usually enough to get the car some base of the fluids warmed up in the engine and maybe the heater. And you could do this on older vehicles literally forever and ever and ever and not have any issues. Some of the problems come in with that is the laws about idling, which is they're saying it's polluting and your vehicle's not efficient at idle and all these other things. And it's true. It takes more gas, more fuel to start your car up, and then let it idle for a period of time. And it actually does for you to drive it in its efficiency range. So just as your car is just sitting there running, right, it will reach operating temperature. The engine oil will reach operating temperature, depending on how ambient it is out there. There is a little bit of changes with the environment. But the catalytic converter really isn't doing its thing. And this goes for particulate filters too. Really not doing what they're supposed to be doing, sitting for idle for a long time. Or idling for days. Like truckers would just let their trucks idle and 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 never have issues. Now you have these fleet vehicles that sit and idle, and by the way that they design the fuel management systems and today's catalytic converters and engine oil consumption, it's just a recipe for disaster. So is it good to start your car and warm it up? Depends on your vehicle. Depends on how well your vehicle is running too. Like if it's running with a bad tune-up or a weak tune-up or carbon on the valves or dirty throttle body and dirty filters and oil consumption, that's a huge recipe for disaster. But I will say if you have a brand new vehicle and it's not consuming oil, it's okay to have some longer idle times. But the way that they design the vehicles today and the consumers take care of them, and the size of catalytic converters, they have to have an operating temperature range. You can't really check a catalytic converter for its efficiency at idle. It's working, it's just not working the way it should be while you're driving. And that's some of the problems that for a car that never sees those highway speeds more than it's idling. So if you're having the reverse spectrum, they drive up to their destination and they start the car and they sit there and just idle for 10 hours. And then they drive back, their shift is over and they park the car, right? Yeah. That converter or particulate filter really hasn't had its opportunity to get hot and clean itself from what it's storing, right? It's only supposed to be storing emissions. It's not supposed to be storing carbon molecules, fuel molecules, stuff that hasn't been through complete combustion. So in the old days when it wasn't so advanced for the emission systems, and I feel in the old days we had more oil leaks than we had oil consumption issues. And I will say that's a fact. Today, people are pumping as much oil out the tailpipe in 5,000 miles than an old hoopty would leak, or it would be the same. Like they had an oil leak that was pretty bad, and they're putting a quart a week in. Well, you have people driving cars that don't leak a drop of oil, or putting a quart or 2 quarts a week in their car. And where is that going? It's clogging up the intake valves. It's clogging up the exhaust valves and the combustion chamber and the spark plugs and the injector tips. And then whatever crap finally starts to loosen up, that's going to get stuck. I call it, the catcher's mitt. The catalytic converters are catching debris that it's not supposed to have in its flow of the exhaust system. So it's only supposed to have almost complete combustion passing through the catalytic converter, and then you're supposed to have water and vapor past the catalytic converter or the particular filter. So on newer vehicles, it's a gamble. Your vehicle should, by design, be able to idle for hours and days on end and not have any issues with that. And Ford Boss Me said that, they had a bunch of fleet vehicles that have long idle times, that the converters were clogged. That's because the way they designed that engine and the tune-up that was in that for idle times was not ideal for that vehicle. So that vehicle's use that it was under, right? And he talks about that. You don't buy an F-150 to do an F-450 job, but people do it, and then they wear the shit out of them. So if you're buying a fleet vehicle, it has to be engineered for long idle times. So there are vehicles that aren't really designed for that. And if Ford's selling the police department, the fire department, and people these vehicles, well, it's Ford's fault. He said, hey, this vehicle is not designed for long idle times. You're going to have problems. And they were putting catalytic converters on. Maybe they were charging them, maybe they weren't. I don't know the ins and outs of it. But that's the way that vehicle was designed, and also the tune-up of that vehicle. And you think it would be a little bit smarter of a logic for those vehicles. If it noticed the vehicle was in idle mode, right? It's like, all right, they should know that, hey, if this customer's sitting at idle and the vehicle's in park, right? That maybe they should bump the base RPM idle up to 1500 and have a message come across and say, hey, vehicle's in idle mode. It automatically engages the parking brake, so that if they try to go, then it's not really going to go. The vehicle's on high idle for a reason, because your idle time is longer than the emission system can handle. That's just and I think diesel trucks have something like that too. It's not like the regen process, but they do have a regen process that it goes through automatically sometimes, and then sometimes you have to induce it. So the advancements in it I don't think are really there. But if they know if it's a fleet vehicle, then they should say, hey, this is for the police department or fire department. We know these vehicles are on long idle time. We need to put a different fuel map in these vehicles to compensate for long idle times, so that it's not at base idle, pumping raw oil into the exhaust, not mixed with combustion at higher RPMs, knowing that this is going to be a problem. So I do believe that there is a map for these vehicles. Like they have maps where you can't go over 85 miles an hour in certain fleet vehicles. So the technology's there. It's just not in all the vehicles. But if you have an older vehicle, you can let it idle for days. Probably wouldn't be a problem. But today's vehicles, it's going to be hit or miss. Especially, the more that they get into these ultra low emissions vehicles, and now you're going to see particulate filters on gasoline vehicles. Customers have no idea what they're in for then. None. You think a catalytic converter is expensive? Wait till you need both. Thanks for watching.